Today, we're uncovering 10 of the most bizarre Hollywood parties that truly happened and where the real stories are stranger than the movies themselves. Marion Davies Beach House Parties. They called it the Playground of the Stars, a sprawling estate on the Santa Monica coast where Hollywood royalty gathered under the watchful eye of a newspaper tycoon. It wasn't just a house, it was a kingdom by the sea. Number 9. Marion Davies was one of the brightest screen stars of the 1920s and 30s, a talented comedian with a natural charm. She should have been remembered purely for her craft, but her life became forever entwined with William Randolph Hearst, the powerful publishing magnate who both loved her and tried to control her destiny. In 1929, Hearst built Davies a beachfront mansion in Santa Monica, a home so extravagant that it stretched across 4 blocks, complete with gardens, a theater, and guest houses. The mansion became the setting for some of the most lavish gatherings of Hollywood's golden age. Charlie Chaplin, Clark Gable, and Douglas Fairbanks were regulars. Bette Davis recalled arriving and feeling as if she had stepped into a royal court on the Pacific coast. Guests lounged by the pool, dined in grand halls, and watched private screenings in Marion's own theater. And yet the parties weren't just for fun. They were carefully orchestrated performances. Hearst ensured Marion remained the center of attention, often quietly steering conversations or discouraging rivals from shining too brightly. One guest described arriving to find a live menagerie on the lawn, exotic animals brought in to delight and impress. Another recalled orchestras playing late into the night while reporters outside tried to capture just a glimpse of the spectacle. Within, at times it seemed less like a party and more like a stage production with Hearst as director and Hollywood as his cast. A columnist wrote in the Los Angeles Press, "To be invited to Marion's was to step into another world, a world where even the Pacific seemed to bow before Hearst's fortune. But behind the glitter of these nights lay a more fragile truth. Marion, though adored, often felt overshadowed by Hearst's empire and his expectations. Her parties became a symbol of Hollywood's contradiction. Dazzling freedom on the surface, quiet control beneath, and as the waves crashed against the beach below, the laughter that filled her mansion carried both joy and a hint of melancholy. Number 8. Howard Hughes Screening Parties. If some Hollywood parties were wild and others were glamorous, Howard Hughes's gatherings were something else entirely strange, obsessive, and unforgettable in their own way. Hughes was already known as a billionaire playboy, an aviation pioneer when he turned his attention to film in the 1930s. His productions, from Hell's Angels to The Outlaw, were ambitious, costly, and often controversial. But it was the way he worked that made his private parties legendary. Guests would be invited to his home or a private theater under the promise of cocktails and conversation. Instead, they found themselves seated before a projector while Hughes screened rough cuts of his films. He would watch silently from the back, scribbling notes, sometimes replaying the same reel over and over until dawn. Friends and actors were expected to stay no matter how long it lasted. Leaving early was unthinkable. One actor who attended recalled the strangeness of it, hours passing in silence as Hughes muttered to himself about camera angles or costume details. It wasn't a party, he later joked. It was a test of endurance. And yet these screenings told the truth about Hughes, a man of brilliance, obsession, and isolation. While Sinatra's parties roared with laughter and Flynn's echoed with music, Hughes's evenings were quiet, intense, and suffocating. They weren't about joy. They were about control. Over time, Hughes's eccentricities grew darker, his parties fewer until he became a recluse. But those who remembered his screenings never forgot them. They were bizarre in their own way, gatherings where Hollywood's most powerful sat captive to one man's vision, watching the same reel spin endlessly into the night. Number 7. The MGM Studio Lot Bashes. In the 1930s, there was one studio that proudly declared it had more stars than there are in heaven. That studio was MGM, and its parties were as grand as the films it produced. When Louis B. Mayer, the studio's iron-fisted mogul, decided to celebrate, he didn't settle for cocktails in a drawing room. He turned the studio lot itself into a stage. MGM's galas were legendary. To outshine rival studios, Mayer commissioned themed extravaganzas that seemed pulled from the pages of fantasy. There was the famous Circus Gala, where elephants lumbered across the pavement. Acrobats tumbled in the rafters, and the studio's contract players paraded in sequined costumes. It was a night where Hollywood's finest dined on caviar while clowns and lions performed only a few feet away. Reporters who slipped through described the parties as surreal, half carnival, and half coronation. Even the animals seemed under contract. One columnist quipped, "Mayor's obsession with control extended even to the festivities. Every star was expected to attend, smile for the cameras, and play their role in Hollywood's carefully constructed fantasy. Attendance wasn't a choice. It was part of the job, and yet beneath the glitter, there was a sense of strain." For many actors, these parties weren't indulgences but obligations. A chance to maintain favor with the studio that owned their future, while guests marveled at elephants wandering through sound stages or dancers twirling under enormous spotlights. Some performers quietly admitted the evenings felt more like performances than celebrations. Still, to those on the outside, MGM's lot bashes symbolized Hollywood's unreachable glamour. They blurred the line between spectacle and reality, reminding the world that, in Hollywood, even a party could feel like a movie, dazzling, controlled, and larger than life. Number 6. Tallulah Bankhead's soirees. She swept into a room like a storm, magnetic, unpredictable, and unforgettable. Tallulah Bankhead was one of Hollywood's great originals, a stage actress whose wit was as sharp as her screen presence. And when Tallulah threw a party, no one ever knew what to expect. By the 1930s, Bankhead had already carved out a reputation as a bold and unapologetic performer. She was quick with a quip, famous for her growly voice and for living exactly as she pleased. Her gatherings became a reflection of her personality, playful, mischievous, and just a little outrageous. Guests might arrive at her home to find poker tables set up in every corner, drinks flowing long after midnight, and Tula herself presiding like a queen, who delighted in breaking every rule of polite society. One night, she reportedly hosted a pajama party, insisting that every guest arrived dressed for bed, no matter their status or stardom. Laughter filled the night as Hollywood's most glamorous names sat cross-legged in silk sleepwear, sipping cocktails and trading jokes as though they were school children at a slumber party. For Tula, that was the joy. Stripping away pretense and forcing everyone to embrace the absurd, her sharp tongue became legend. When asked about her wild ways, she laughed and declared, "If I had to live my life again, I'd make all the same mistakes, only sooner." That irreverence made her beloved by friends and feared by the cautious Hollywood establishment. But behind the bravado, there was always a sense of defiance. A woman resisting the industry's attempts to box her in. Her parties weren't just gatherings. They were statements. They declared her freedom to live, to laugh, and to shock. And for those lucky enough to attend, a night at Tula's was a reminder that Hollywood wasn't always about control. Sometimes it was about chaos, charm, and the sheer joy of being alive. Number 5. Errol Flynn's Mulholland House gatherings. He was the swashbuckling hero of the silver screen, the man who leapt from ships, drew his sword, and charmed audiences with a smile. But off-screen, Errol Flynn's legend grew just as large, and nowhere more so than in his notorious Mulholland Drive home. Flynn rose to fame in the 1930s with Captain Blood and cemented his place in Hollywood history with the adventures of Robin Hood. Yet, as much as audiences adored his daring performances, Hollywood insiders whispered just as much about the parties he hosted in his hillside mansion. Built in the 1930s, the house overlooked Los Angeles like a fortress. And inside, Flynn entertained with a kind of reckless abandon that defined his reputation. Guests remembered wild-themed nights, masks, costumes, and rooms filled with laughter until dawn. Stories circulated of secret passages and even hidden peepholes in the walls. Details that blurred the line between fact and legend, but were repeated so often they became part of Hollywood folklore. Flynn himself seemed to enjoy fanning the flames, once quipping, "I like my whiskey old and my women young," a line that newspapers never forgot. These gatherings weren't just parties. They were spectacles. Musicians played until sunrise. The bar never closed, and guests from every corner of Hollywood, actors, musicians, socialites, drifted in and out like players on a stage. For some, the nights felt exhilarating, a release from the rigid studio system. For others, the excess carried a darker edge, a sense that Flynn's charm was chasing something he could never quite catch. His Mulholland home eventually fell into disrepair, but the stories of what happened there endure. They remind us of Hollywood's other side, the one where glamour tipped into chaos and where even a screen hero could lose himself in the shadows of his own legend. Number 4. Sinatra's Rat Pack parties in Palm Springs. In the desert heat of Palm Springs under Skies full of stars, Frank Sinatra built a retreat that became the unofficial headquarters of the Rat Pack. If Hollywood was the stage, Palm Springs was the playground. And when Sinatra threw a party, it was an event everyone remembered. By the 1950s, Sinatra had reinvented himself from crooner to Academy Award-winning actor and the undisputed leader of the Rat Pack, alongside Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop. He embodied cool sophistication mixed with unrestrained mischief. His Palm Springs estate, complete with a piano-shaped swimming pool, became the backdrop for countless nights of music, camaraderie, and chaos. Guests recalled tuxedo-clad men launching water balloon fights in the desert air, only to end the night huddled around a piano while Sinatra or Martin crooned standards until sunrise. Politicians mingled with actors, mobsters brushed shoulders with starlets, and the air buzzed with a sense that history was happening in real time. Sinatra, ever the host, insisted no one leave hungry, thirsty, or unentertained. Dean Martin once remarked, "It was never work with Frank, it was family." That feeling was what made the gatherings legendary. The men teased each other like brothers, turned practical jokes into high art, and created an atmosphere where laughter never stopped. But the parties also carried weight. Behind the humor and hijinks, Sinatra's gatherings symbolized influence. Deals were struck, alliances forged, and friendships tested. A casual conversation at his Palm Springs home could ripple out into Hollywood and even Washington. For those who were there, the nights at Sinatra's retreat captured the very essence of mid-century Hollywood. Glamour laced with unpredictability, showmanship infused with genuine camaraderie. To be invited was to step into a circle where loyalty mattered as much as laughter, and where under the desert moon, Hollywood's Rat Pack lived larger than life. Number 3. Elizabeth Taylor's Diamond Jubilee. She was Hollywood royalty, violet-eyed, magnetic, and larger than life. When Elizabeth Taylor celebrated, it wasn't just a party. It was a spectacle. And one birthday in the late 1960s became the stuff of legend. By then, Taylor had grown from child star to two-time Academy Award winner, and her life was as closely watched as any movie she ever made. At the heart of her story was her tempestuous romance with actor Richard Burton. Their love affair burned bright, fueled by passion, arguments, reconciliations, and a shared taste for extravagance. When Burton set out to honor her birthday in 1969, he chose the only gift he felt worthy of her, a diamond so massive it stopped the world. At her party, amid laughter, champagne, and the hum of Hollywood's elite, Burton presented Elizabeth with a jewel that became instantly famous, the 69-carat Taylor Burton diamond. It glittered under the lights like a star of its own, and in that moment it seemed to capture everything about her, dazzling, rare, and impossible to ignore. Elizabeth herself embraced the drama of it all. She once declared with a smile, "Big girls need big diamonds." It was a line that would follow her forever, as much a symbol of her wit as her appetite for life's grandest gestures. The evening wasn't just about a stone. It was about the theater of love, about a couple whose passion played out in public for all to see. Guests recalled an atmosphere of awe, a sense that they were witnessing not just a birthday, but a coronation of Hollywood's true queen. Yet even in the glow of diamonds, there was always a shadow. Taylor's life was as turbulent as it was glamorous, her joys often matched by struggles. Still on that night, with a diamond glittering at her throat and laughter echoing around her, Elizabeth Taylor embodied the sheer extravagance of Hollywood's golden age. Beauty, love, and legend, all wrapped in brilliance. Number 2. Truman Capote's Black and White Ball. They called it the party of the century. A night so extravagant, so carefully staged that more than half a century later, it remains the benchmark for high society glamour. On November the 28th, 1966, author Truman Capote gathered 500 of the most powerful people in the world beneath the chandeliers of New York's Plaza Hotel, and Hollywood came along for the ride. Capote had just published In Cold Blood, and with his literary fame at its peak, he decided to cement his place as not just a writer, but a society figure. His guest list was as carefully edited as any manuscript. From Frank Sinatra and Mia Farrow to Hollywood's grande dames and Washington power brokers, each invitation was a golden ticket to immortality. To make the night more striking, Capote demanded that every guest wear only black and white tuxedos, gowns, and of course, masks. The effect was breathtaking. The plaza's ballroom became a sea of monochrome elegance with chandeliers reflecting off satin and silk. Reporters outside scrambled to document who was arriving, while those left off the list seethed with envy. Gossip columnists whispered that the night blurred the lines between film, politics, and literature, uniting worlds that rarely collided so perfectly. Capote, basking in the attention, moved among his guests like a conductor, ensuring every moment struck the right note. A reporter from the New York Times declared simply, "It was the party of the century." And yet, even in its triumph, the ball hinted at Capote's own contradictions. The man who so desperately sought intimacy spent the evening orchestrating spectacle, surrounding himself with power and fame, rather than the quiet companionship he often longed for. Still, for those who were there, the black and white ball was unforgettable. It wasn't just a party. It was a performance, a mask over a city. And for one glittering night, Hollywood's glamour merged seamlessly with the world of high society. Number 1. The Garden of Allah Hotel Parties. It wasn't a mansion, and it wasn't quite a hotel. It was something stranger. And for nearly 3 decades, it was the beating heart of Hollywood nightlife, the Garden of Allah, once the home of silent film star Alan Nazimova, opened its doors in 1927 as a hotel and quickly became the place where stars went to live, to drink, and to forget the rigid rules of the studio system. The hotel was a sprawling Mediterranean-style compound with villas, gardens, and a shimmering pool that became its centerpiece. That pool was the stage for countless stories. Writers like F. Scott Fitzgerald, Dorothy Parker, and Robert Benchley mingled with actors such as Humphrey Bogart, Harold Flynn, and Marlene Dietrich. The evenings often ended with guests, still in tuxedos or gowns, diving into the water, fully clothed, laughter echoing across Sunset Boulevard. One Hollywood wit once remarked that the pool was the most chlorine-filled in town to clean away all the sins committed in it. That line captured the garden's reputation perfectly. It wasn't just a hotel, it was a haven where the bright lights of Hollywood dimmed and stars could live without the eyes of their studio bosses. The Garden of Allah was also known for its literary crowd, a rare place where novelists and screenwriters traded ideas with actors and musicians. It was messy, chaotic, and entirely unlike the polished image Hollywood tried to project. When the garden was demolished in 1959, many felt an era had ended. The parties had been wild, the nights unrepeatable, and the stories unforgettable. For those who had known it, the Garden of Allah wasn't just a hotel. It was a piece of Hollywood's soul lost to time, but never to memory. Jane Mansfield's Pink Palace parties. If Elizabeth Taylor was Hollywood royalty, Jane Mansfield was its carnival queen. In the 1950s and 60s, her Beverly Hills mansion became one of the most talked-about houses in America. Not for who lived there, but for how it looked. The Pink Palace, as it came to be called, was exactly that, a surreal dream in shades of rose. Everything inside seemed dipped in pink. The carpets, the walls, the furniture, even the champagne served to guests matched the theme. The centerpiece was a heart-shaped swimming pool tiled in gold with the words, "I love you, Janie," glinting at the bottom. For Hollywood's curious, the house was irresistible. Mansfield hosted parties that were less about cocktails and more about spectacle. Guests arrived expecting music, laughter, and a tour of the house itself, which was as much an attraction as the star. Reporters who attended described stepping into another world. Part Barbie Dreamland, part Hollywood Shrine, with Mansfield presiding as hostess in her trademark pink gowns. It may have seemed kit, but Mansfield knew exactly what she was doing. Her parties reinforced her image as Hollywood's blonde bombshell, a woman who embraced excess and turned her life into theater. When Mansfield's life ended tragically in 1967, the Pink Palace took on an eerie afterlife. For years it remained a curiosity, visited by fans and later owned by other celebrities. But for those who remembered it at its height, the Pink Palace was unforgettable. A home where even the wallpaper seemed to blush, and where Hollywood's strangest fantasies came to life in shades of pink. Which of these gatherings surprised you the most? And if you could step back in time just for one night, which Hollywood party would you want to witness?